Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening into another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by a super cool dude. We were just talking before the podcast, but I also talked to Steve Schwartzer about this. Tony Severio is a knife maker that is a humongous influence in the knife making craft because he's taken all of his experience and posted it on to YouTube. He has some really great videos out there. And when I was learning how to make dovetailed bolsters and to apply them correctly to my knives, I looked at Tony's video probably not long after he posted it about 4 years ago. And it's something that I'm actually known for and recognized for inside of my own knives. So I've known Tony in the periphery and kind of followed him as a YouTube sensation and his work as I see in publication and whatnot. But it didn't really dawn on me until recently that that's the person that I should have on the podcast. So Tony, it's an incredible pleasure to have you on and get to talk about your life and everything. And I just really appreciate you spending the time with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I guess, I usually start out with just asking a little about history. I've seen all of your social media and website type of stuff and whatnot, and I kind of want to pick into a little bit of that as we go along. But I'd really like, in your words, if you could just talk a little bit about, how you grew up and how knives played a role in that, and what made you decide to get into knife making.
Sure. Sure. Well, I grew up in South Louisiana and some in southern Mississippi, but I was born and raised here in South Louisiana around the Baton Rouge area, little town called Denham Springs, kind of halfway in between the swamps and woodlands, upper woodlands, what we call woodlands here. Excuse me. But, doing a lot of hunting and fishing was a common thing. It was, I was raised in a pretty modest uh, family. My dad was a laborer and a welder, and we just worked hard, and it was we were a poor family, and we did things the poor folks way, as people would say. We raised our gardens, and we raised our animals that we ate, and we hunted and fished, and we ate from the land. So it was a great childhood. I enjoyed it. I have a brother and a sister, and had a lot of family around where I grew up, and so I had a lot of, not just my siblings, but cousins and all, that we grew up together. We did a lot of camping, and we had places to fish, on the bayous, and my dad always had a camp on the bayou, and we spent a lot of time there. I mean, our summers and a lot of times in the winter. I mean, my dad would do off and on commercial fishing, and so we used knives a lot, to say the least. I mean, whether it was skinning game or fish or hogs and cows, that we raised, rabbits, you name it, we raised it. And so knives were a big part of my life. And I mean, I had a knife in my hand at a very young age. Um, my dad would put it in our hands, and we would help. So probably in my 7, 8 years old, I was using a knife and learning how to use a knife. But it was a great childhood, great experience. Um, my grandfather was an outdoorsman, and he was like a Tom Sawyer to me. And matter of fact, has a story that kind of sidelines the Tom Sawyer story. But he was like a kid till he died, and he just wanted to stay in the woods, and he and I would go in the woods at after breakfast and not come home for a couple of days. We would just stay in the woods. We didn't have camp, equipment, anything like that. We would just sleep under the trees back in the swamp. And he taught me a lot about just basic navigation at night in the woods and how to get out if you got lost and how to find your way using the stars and just different things like that. But he was a character. A lot of good times.
Yeah, that's really cool. In the difference, I think, between the hunting that I grew up around and then I moved to Texas when I was 18, is like the swamp experience of hunting is a completely different one than just being out on dry land and everything, especially with how you traverse it. Did you, in addition to like normal Louisiana game, did you do a lot of swamp hunting, like for alligators and other things like that too?
Oh yeah, we did. A lot of apart. Frogging and catching alligators and things like that was all part of it. I mean, so where I lived was, not on the bayou, but just a little few miles. I could be on the bayou just down the road, and just a few miles north of me, I could be in the upper lands of southern Mississippi. So if you go north of New Orleans and north west, just about 50 miles, that's where I'm at. So I was in that midpoint. So we got the kind of like the best of both worlds of hunting and wildlife. You either had the extreme swamp or the rolling hills, as we call them. And so you was, hunting whitetail in the rolling hills and other game down in the swamp, but a lot of whitetail in the swamp. We just didn't hunt them a lot down there because it's a whole kind of different kind of hunting, gear wise and access and everything else to deer hunt in the water. That's basically what you're hunting in. But once you get out of the very wet land, I should say, you it might be, you'd have an occasional uh, water would be in a little bit of whatever you're rabbit hunting and things like that. You'd be wearing waders or rubber boots, but running beagles and things like that. But in a lot of cases, there was no water. It just depends on the season and what's going on with the weather. And then there's some places where it's just nothing but water. But a lot of the hunting that I enjoyed was in the north of where I lived in the rolling hills, where I did a lot of game hunting, rabbit, squirrel, and deer, and that sort of thing. But most of the southern stuff was, like you say, it was more fishing, and which included alligators and that sort of thing. But we ate everything that was on the bayou and in the bayou. So a lot of people would frown if I even mentioned some of the things we eat, like nutria. Yeah, and I'm sure you know what that is.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've ever eaten nutria before, but when it comes to frog legs and alligator and stuff, it's just the other white meat.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
that's
yeah,
what they say.
I mean, I those kind of foods, I've never really shied away from it. I spent a little bit of time living in Louisiana when I was a kid. I was about 11 years old, and we were just out in Oakdale area outside of Alexandria,
Yeah,
and I gained a deep appreciation for the types of food that come out of the Cajun culture, and I. Whether it's crawfish or etouffees or things like that, whatever type of seafoods and things that you can catch local and whatnot. I've always really appreciated that, and I think that's one thing that actually really is endearing about the culture in Louisiana is that the food and the terrain and the culture. Music and everything like that are all just kind of like this big melting pot. It's like the culture in Louisiana is like a good gumbo.
yeah, it is, man. And when you just mentioned something that I discuss a lot with people. Back in in my filmmaking days and working with a guy that's doing documentary here and talking about Cajun music and and it's the same with Cajun food, whether you're in southeast Louisiana or southwest Louisiana or north Louisiana. So the music is totally different, in my opinion, from the southeast to the southwest. And the same with food. For example, the way a gumbo is prepared in southeast is compared to Southwest. As there's different ways, different ingredients, and of course, I have a pretty extreme opinion about it, but I try to back it up with history and facts, you know. And I've had some great conversations with friends and folks from the other, what I call across the pond, which is the Atchafalaya Basin, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I've gotten almost fist fights around people and whether beans go in chili or not. So that seems to be
Yeah,
the Texas argument. So I can understand
yeah,
with the different foods, you know, and that's something that like not every bit of Louisiana is swamp. There's lots of people who don't really understand the culture or layout or things. And to me, it's just always been real cool because what I learned when I moved down to Texas is there's so many different microclimates, and it's no different in Louisiana because there's like everything near the ocean, and then all the bayou and piney woods and everything like that too, and rolling hills. It's like there's so many different flavors of Louisiana for everybody to have, and that's why I make an association with the culture in general because it is like I became acquainted with Cajun style fiddling and whatnot because I was a fiddle player up in the Appalachians in Pennsylvania, and we we'd learn like a lot of traditional Appalachian fiddle tunes and whatnot. But I also had a teacher that was from Nova Scotia, and I had lived there for a little while too. Followed my dad for work, and the French influence in music from Canada, and then how I got into some of the music from Louisiana and whatnot is real interesting to me. But whether it's music, whether it's food, whether it's the history, or the landscape, it's just, I mean, there's so much that you can pull from Louisiana itself, and knives is no exception to that. I mean, I've seen some incredible knives come out of the Louisiana people, and it seems, whereas the footprint was maybe a little bit more scattered before, we see things like the Louisiana Knife Show that I guess it'll be next week when this is actually published online. It'll be that weekend, the ninth, right? But there's
yes,
some incredible knife makers from the area joining that, and their work is superb too.
right, right. Well, there's a lot of makers that have gone that were very good. I mean, that's no longer with us and no longer making. I mentioned one of them a while ago, which is Robert Captapon, him and his son Randy. And you had Mike Sanders, and you had one that just passed away here a while back, Master Smith in West Louisiana. And I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he was incredible. Um, uh, you got J.W. Randall in Louisiana. He's a Master Smith that makes outstanding looking blades, and he's been here a long time making knives. But it's like the culture. It's a melting pot, and there has been some popularity with knives over the years. Of course, the TV show has caused a lot of that, but um, that's cool. It gets the word out, and we've got some up and coming makers that are doing great work here, and it's good to see. Very good to see.
Yeah. So, what what did you do before you got into knives? I know that we've talked a little bit about film and movies and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about that phase of your life and what kind of got you into knife making specifically?
Well, I started making knives in around 1989, so it's been a very long time. I just I did a lot of I like to do a lot of things, Of course, I wasn't doing it full time, but my background was an electrician, and but I started as a welder under my father, and when welding ran out back during those days, and things were tough with the economy, I had young crumb grabbers to feed, and I just started working with electricians, welding for them. And we work in chemical plants and refineries here. That's what I was doing, and so eventually I migrated over to the electrical field after going to some schooling and working with the contractors I was working with to help me get into trade school and learn the craft, and I became a journeyman electrician. And but during that time, I always, I mean, I made my first knife from a file, and uh, and then I made a lot of more sharp, pointy objects, and I started with a side grinder and some kind of Sears 4-inch belt sanding thing, not made for knives, but um, it's just very rudimentary knife making, if that's what you want to call it. And but before that, it was focusing on my career as an electrician. I wasn't really ever focused on making knives for a living. I was just wanting to make a better knife, is the way I put it to myself. And I got off into the filmmaking at an early age as well. So I was doing, being interested in filmmaking and knife making basically at the same time. So both were my hobby, and I started dabbling with short film. I'm talking about shooting on actual 8 millimeter film. We didn't have, that was before we had video cameras, and now we have digital cameras and things like that. And of course, I could have never afford a 16 millimeter, which is quite a step above an 8. And, so I started down that path making short films. And eventually, years down the road, just kept upgrading equipment, learning more about the craft, meeting, uh, people in the industry, and just kind of making my way. And once we got the internet, I found out more about knife making, and I found out more about filmmaking, and made more connections and all that thing. So eventually, yeah, I wanted to delve off not just into filmmaking but into acting as well. So um, eventually I got an agent, and I've had 2 or 3 different ones, but and I never was a good actor, and obviously I'm not in it, but no longer. I don't fool with the business anymore. But my youngest son's still active, and he's done very well with it. But as far as a filmmaker, I mean, I worked as a director, a producer, editor, a director of photography on several films over the years. I mean, I wrote and directed 2 full-length features, but I worked as a DP on several films, and producer, and production assistants all the way down. I mean, I started out doing extra work for acting, and when I first got my foot into the film world, as far as what I call the Hollywood world, not just independent filmmaking. It's a whole different world. Let me put it to you that way. Um, there's a lot of politics, and which has a lot to do why I'm no longer in the business. Plus, I lost my butt on my film company, but I'm not even going to go into that because we had a production company, and we was doing commercials, and um, mostly commercials, and internet commercials. And then one of my features pretty much put us under, and that's the price you pay. It's a very risky business, and it's risky for your investors. It's risky for everybody because you just can't predict, the outcome of a film. I mean, you take the latest Indiana Jones, for example. Everybody that was a part of that project would tell you that it's going to make a killing. Well, it flopped. It's very hard to predict. And, no matter how good you think you are, no matter good your story, it's really all about how good your marketing is, and which is totally separate from acting. You have to market yourself and train. And uh, I've had my foot in a lot of things. I've met a lot of great people along the way, a lot of famous people I've worked with and got to know and become friends with. And um, it's been a crazy ride. Let me put it to you that way. But the knife making was parallel in all of that at the same time. I was, maybe there's something wrong with me. I can't be still, and I just a lot of things interest me, and you know, whether it's hunting, fishing, knife making, film making. That my mother's an artist, and that's where I get a lot of that from. And my dad was an outdoorsman and a builder, and he could build anything, craftsman. So it's a combination of things, I guess, in the genes.
Yeah,
But
that's all incredibly fascinating. I mean, I would say that there's not a lot of difference, I guess, with being in the film industry and knives in the sense of business, because there's a lot of risk involved with knives, and for the like a highly successful or celebrity style of knife maker, right? But
exactly.
it's like make or break. You go to a show and spend a lot of money, and it could bust you, or you could invest a lot of money in materials or things like that. But there's a lot of knife makers I know that are phenomenal knife makers that you would not know that they existed unless it was for some presence on social media, because there's not like the guild shows, like the national guild shows anymore and things like that. It's like there's one avenue that they kind of stuck to, and if you were outside of that world, you almost never see them.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I took a 5-year break um, with my knife making. I think I made 3 knives in that break, and it was totally. I was totally focused on my film business and filmmaking, and plus I was at the same time I was busy. I had an agent that had me on the road every day. I may be flying to South Carolina to audition, and so I was so busy with that. It was hard for me to really focus on on knife making. And so eventually, I had to make a choice, and of course, the business made it for me when we lost our company, and I decided to just focus on knife making and make a living. Eventually, I went full time with this 2 years ago, and I've been very blessed to say the least. And I haven't. I mean, I've never had a table at Blade Show. I did shows here in South Louisiana way back when, and hadn't done shows in years. This will be the first show that I've done in many years. I've just built a clientele and marketed myself, my knives, my work, and through social media and like you've seen the videos. I believe that making videos showing potential customers what goes into your knife, how you make it, and the work that goes into it is a big selling factor. And it's a little more. It lends a little more appreciation to the maker and to what goes into the craft and to the product. And it's kind of like I'm opening my shop and let you see and watch, and this is how I do it. And so I haven't had to do any shows, and because I mean right now I'm booked out. I'm booked out probably a year, and I don't advise anybody doing that because it has really caused me a lot of headache. I was warned not to do that. My good buddy Steve Schwarzer warned me not to do that, and I would really rather just make what I want to make and sell it, because custom knives with a list is a pain. Let me tell you, it is a pain. But again, it's a blessing for me. Um, when I went full time, I I haven't stopped. I haven't. It hasn't been easy at all, and there's nothing lucrative about this. If you're going to make high quality knives, not just prison shanks with a shiny handle, broom handle on it, and sharp, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I see a TikTok's famous for that. I'm on there too, and but if you want the good clients and you want to have a reputation, you need to make quality products, and it takes time to do that. And it depends on the style and all that, and the knife you're working on. I do both stock removal and forged knives. I make all of my own Damascus. So it depends on what I'm making. If I'm doing stainless knives or forged mosaics, the one's going to take a lot more work and a lot more time than the other. And most of the knives that I make and sell and people want are mosaic hunters and skinners. It's not a lot of the stainless knives that I made. That I do make, and but I enjoy doing both. I don't have a preference, but I really love forging. Let me just say that forging is a lot of fun, but it's not an easy business, and it's not an overnight deal. And it took me 30 plus years to collect the tools that I have today, and I build a lot of my own tools, and it just doesn't happen overnight. You have to build a reputation and a client list or clientele, and like the movie, if you build it, they will come. And it just takes a long time. It did for me. Let me say that. And I'm not there. I'm not like Steve Schwarzer says. When you think you have arrived, you're just getting started, and that's the truth.
Yeah. Well, and it's I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing or if it's just a human condition thing. But I saw this cartoon that was up on Facebook or something like that, and it showed two different lines, and it showed people who want to be successful, or or winning. You're right there. Everybody's like lined up to be in the winning line, but then the little booth or whatever or line that's talks about doing what it takes to win. Nobody shows up to it, right? And like that's something that I think that's really a difficult concept for a lot of people to understand, is that there is no get rich quick schemes in anything that has a lot of substance. If it's here today and gone tomorrow, it might be easy to break in, or maybe you can get your foot in the door and hit a luck streak. But if you're really like looking at the building blocks of anything that has substance for a long period of time, it takes a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And that's no small thing in knives either, because I've seen the hands of hard-working knife makers, and they are not pretty.
Yeah, man, you got that right. It's 80 hours a week. I work a minimum of 60 for sure, and the last month or so, I've been putting in way more than that. As a matter of fact, when this podcast is over, I'll be in the shop finishing up some heat treating. So it's a never-ending process. You got to stay with it. You can't. You just got to quit counting your labor.
Yeah.
At least in the customs, it's a different world if you're doing, a factory or a production style knife, and that's something I would love to do. I just don't know if that's ever going to work out, but who knows?
Yeah, and that even comes with a lot of risk too, because like I see some custom makers who will spend a decent amount of time in their career developing new patterns out and things like that, and then they get to a point where one pattern is like a really hot ticket for them, and then they'll try to take that into the production world. But unless you have a lot of savings, or you know that pre-orders are going to work out well, or you have an avenue where somebody's going to buy them and take that risk on for you. You got to spend all that money in manufacturing those things and finish them out and quality control, and then you have to worry about if another production company makes it for you, if they're going to ruin your reputation on a production line. So it's like nothing good comes without risk. But there's a lot of things that if the more risk averse you are, the harder it's going to be because you're growing stuff real slow.
Right, right. And everything you just said is all of the reasons why I haven't.
Yeah.
I have folders on my computer with ideas and marketing plans and business plans for something like that that just I'll click off of it after thinking about it a while because it's a huge risk, like you say, with anything. And it's the man or the person with a great vision and a good, very good plan and a good marketing strategy that can make that work. You take like Josh Smith, he has a great model. And I can remember, I have the magazine here in my shop office somewhere of Josh Smith standing at a grinder when he was 13 years old. And, I was just reading the magazine. I was a young knife maker. And, uh, and I was like, you would never know, you never see that one day, this guy would be a master smith that's now got a very high quality company, knife production company. And, but he's got a great plan. And he's running it well apparently.
Yeah, I mean, and another thing about Josh and the Montana Knife Company is that, well, one he's gotten a lot of really great exposure from Joe Rogan and a lot of the other hunting crowds and celebrities, but one thing that I really appreciate about his product is very high quality for the cost.
Yeah.
And so it puts those knives, which I would probably consider them production, but really semi-production because he's touching every, or his team is touching every one of them, and quality controlling them real high. But but the quality of those knives is what I would consider something coming out of a master smith's mind. He doesn't skimp on those things just to make a quick buck. And if he's making money at it, that's great. But those, like some of the prices on like a Speed Goat and other products like that are very obtainable for knife collectors or users that don't have the extra scratch to get into true custom work. So it's kind of opening up the world of knives to a lot more people too.
You're right. And he's leveraging. He's a great communicator, and he's a good leader, and that's where it starts. I can tell you with any business, um, and he's put it forth, and starting with a mediocre setup and running with it, and man, that's just awesome. I mean, I'm happy for that man. I think it's a great thing for him. But like you say, it is a high quality product, and his reputation will sell it, and then once the user has it, it's going to sell more of them because it's a high quality product, and that's with from the nobody name maker to the maker with a big name. That's where it starts. That's the seed, and I, I tell people this all the time. I didn't sell my knives for a long time. I made them, and I'd give them to my uncles and brothers and cousins. But I could look at them and say, that ain't that great. And I went to a knife show here in Louisiana, and I said I'm gonna sell my knife. I walked around and I saw a few tables and said I can sell my knives, with these guys. So I get my table and I'm set up at the show, and I'm sitting right next to Randy and Robert Captapon. And I looked at their knives and looked at mine, and I wanted to cover mine up. And no matter how much I thought I was ready, I was still needing some help. And I think that's if you can recognize that, and even to this day, I have makers look at my knives and mastersmiths. A while back, Swarzer, he'll stop by here and stay with me, and we'll get to hang out in the shop a couple of days, and he'll sit down and say, okay, what do you think about this knife? And he'll be brutal about it, and he'll work me over the coals, and that's exactly what I want. I want to know what you think about it. Same with my bud J.W. Randall. He'll tell you if there's, if you want to hear it, he'll tell you, and I think that's a lot of young makers don't want to have any input. They get kind of angry at you, and if you don't want to know, don't ask. I think you need to learn as much as you can and continue learning, because that's what I do. I want to continue learning, and I'm nobody, and I learn something every day, and I see knives every day that is miles and leaps and bounds ahead of mine, and I want to just sell all of my equipment and do something else. So, and that's just something I recognize. A person ought to want to get better all the time at their craft, and instead of trying to sell a prison shank, focus on making a better prison shank till you get something that's you got some good clean grind lines, and um, something besides a broom handle for grip, and unless that's what the it's designed for. But that is the biggest problem I see in this if anybody wanting to grow and become a better maker and become successful smith, like we were talking about with Josh. He didn't settle for prison shanks, I can tell you, and I don't want to do that either. It's just something that ought to be in a person for any craftsman to have some pride about your work, and quality, and the whole 9 yards. That's the only way you can build customers anyway. They know a customer or collector or anybody, they're not, if you can see it, they can see it. And uh, from heat treating to the final product. um, I, I tell this story a lot. I met a maker that learned how to forge or make knives from watching a TV show, and for 2 years, he was making these things and selling them, and didn't realize he needed to temper it. Didn't realize he needed to temper his knives. And so, can you imagine what's running around out there? I mean, it's that I just don't understand, why you would jump off into doing that without learning the craft and educating yourself beyond a reality show. And I'm not knocking the TV show. I don't. I know a lot of. I have a lot of friends that's been on it. And my J.W. Randall's been on there twice, won it twice. Um, but it's not an educational program, so people shouldn't take it as that. It's entertainment. I've worked on those shows, those kind of shows, reality TV shows, and I can promise you, it's to entertain. It's all full of drama, and you name it. And so proper education. And fortunately, it took me a while, but I was able to get that and go and get under somebody's wing. And whenever I can, I get under somebody else's wing, and learn more, and continue to learn the craft. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah. No, I can't really place it. Like the mentality, whether it's like, whether it comes from ego or whether it comes from like culture or things like that. Like I hear so many stories of older knife makers that the experience they got from like the previous generation or group of makers was it was almost critical of their work to the point where they would rather you fail out and not do it to like discourage you, and so there wasn't so many makers than it was to actually encourage you. But in this world of of makers that I've associated with and seek mentorship from and everything, I haven't experienced anybody who would rather get a leg up in the industry over my dead body in the swamp, right? It's it's
Exactly.
it's everybody is so willing to help and so willing to invest their time at their own detriment because they can't spend that time in the shop or promoting themselves or things like that. That if you will seek it out, then there's any number of guys that will be there to help you, not just tell you that your thing sucks because they want to discourage you. And I think that maybe that's a large difference because, in making knives for 30 plus years, you've probably seen the gambit too, where, there's those people who won't give you the time of day because they just don't want to see you go anywhere. And then being the kind of knife maker and mentor where you're more than willing to share yourself in every capacity that you can just to help another person like get under themselves and try to figure it all out. I think that's more people should take advantage of that and seek out people, because we don't operate in an island, right? I mean, we're all in some way influenced by other knife makers and other artisans in order to get where we are, and it doesn't detract from your own work if you take these pieces. I mean, look at Steve Schwarzer. He's somebody who will give attribution to all the people that he can that helped him to get where he was or to build his Rolodex of knowledge, and he is proud of that. He's proud of the people that he's associated with, and it's no detriment to a person if they are willing to seek knowledge out and seek constructive criticism for their work in order to get better.
Well, yeah, man. I'll tell you some things about the past, but you, my theory or my opinion is you only compete against yourself. I'm not competing against anybody else, and that's what I've held on to for a long time. And when I first started making, I was fortunate that eventually it took a year or so before I met the captivates and took me on their wing and really straightened me out of what I had already learned. And I was learning from books. We didn't have internet, like I say, or at least I didn't. It was very infant back then. Very few people had it, and there wasn't anything online. So I, they really straightened me out on a lot. They taught me how to make dovetail bolsters and how to pin them, but that wasn't something new. That had been around for quite a while, and they learned it from someone. And like George Heron and some of those, Ron Gaston from the Carolinas. There, I mean, that's what he did. And if you look at some of his work and look at some of my older knives, and you can see that I was, making my bolsters like his and some of my handle shapes. But one of the reasons that it took me so long to join and get into ABS and go for my journeyman stamp is because of what you was talking about a while ago. Exactly. And I'm talking about from the guild and the ABS in the old days. There was a lot of what you're talking about, man. It's people didn't want to share anything. They didn't want anybody else to compete with. There was too many makers, and I mean, you didn't have to be told right in the face about it. It was obvious. And then there was a bickering going on between the two organizations about stock removal and forged and which one was better. I don't know if you remember that stuff, but it was it was crazy.
Yeah.
But now that has went away, or at least I can't see any of it. And I think that both the Guild and the ABS are fine, outstanding organizations, or they're run by great people today. And it made me decide, and I had a few master smiths and smiths pushing me, go, you need to get your journeyman stamp. And so I did. I went and tested. I hadn't got my stamp. I went and tested my performance test. And but I'm just excited about that, and I'm excited about the organization. And a friend of mine is just joined the guild, and I think it's a great community now. And like you were talking about, everybody now is sharing and willing to help. And I can remember when that was not the case. And one of the reasons why I started putting things online several years ago was for that reason. I'm going to share with the people, guys that want to know, that don't just can't find anybody to help them, and maybe just a little bit of what I can share will help somebody. And I wasn't monetized or anything like that until recently. I'm talking a couple of years ago. So I've been putting out content just for the some of it is, it helps market myself, but it's valuable material in a lot of ways. Like you were talking about the dovetail bolster video. It may not be the best way to do something, but it'll get somebody started. I even do things differently now, as far as dovetail bolsters, than I did back then. I have a few shortcuts, a few things I do different, but that's just, the basics are there. But you would never find anything like that or anybody sharing anything like that 25 years ago. It wasn't nowhere, and you had to really know somebody, and somebody had to take you under their wing, and don't show anybody this, and blah blah blah. I've even had people comment online to me, why are you sharing this? I don't understand what the problem is. Is there something wrong with that? Well, you sharing secrets. Well, it's not a secret. They learned it from somebody. They didn't develop it. It's like knife patterns. There's not a knife pattern out there that's today that's original, unless it's some kind of fantasy pattern. Basic using knives and have been around forever. I've got a box out in my shop that probably has 1,000 patterns in it. And I'll see one pop up online, and I just developed this pattern. You can't use it, but here I want to show it to you. And I look in my box, and there I got one pretty close to it. It's that kind of thing. I don't, unless you're patenting something like that and selling it and marketing as a production deal, you know, it's kind of hard to argue with that stuff. But sidetracking you there, it's a different world today. You take guys like Nick Rossi and uh, you know so many makers that are sharing their knowledge with people, and just got schools, and they're making a living from it, and making a living from sharing, not just making the tool, but showing people how to do it. And I think that is the coolest thing ever, man. Um, it's a different world now. Put it to you that way.
Yeah, and I don't feel that that's a sidetrack. I mean, that's kind of the point of the conversation, right? Is um I think that my like a portion of my consideration is trying to accumulate valuable knowledge, right? Because in the age of the internet, anybody can post anything, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's qualified, right?
Right, right.
And like I'll use an example of why I really liked your video on dovetail bolsters is um, a good looking knife, even if a lot of people can't explain what makes it look good, is that it's geometrically beautiful, right? It has all of the ratios that the human eye looks at and finds pleasing. And that's everything from the finish to the profile to the pin placement to the handle material colors, everything. And even there's lots of knives that I see that might not have a proportion that's like super, like doesn't hit on all the points for me. But I can argue always that it has great ratios and things. And the idea, at least that I had when I was going to get into bolsters, is that I didn't want the bolsters to be misaligned, and I wanted them to have a really great chamfer or bevel on the the ricasso side, and I wanted them to all line up correctly on the back side where the handle material fits. And when you add dovetails onto that, you add an additional level of geometry and dimensionality that you have to account for in your setup. Otherwise, when you get that all together, it's going to look like garbage if it's not right. And
That's right.
and the way that you laid that out not only took into account those things for me. Like I could tell that we were on the same page about what you should look for in good, like well executed dovetail bolsters. But you also showed a process to get from the start to the finish on that that produced that results. And so for me, it was just a really complete video. Now, I mean, I've also modified some of the way that I do things. Like I've had a pin press for a long time, but I wasn't always using it for my bolsters, and I incorporated that in to get the bolsters to line up correctly and everything, and make sure that there's no shifting going on. I use a file guide just to hold everything true. I've used super glue at first to attach the bolsters together to get the symmetry right and everything on both sides. But I've switched to using like painter's tape and duct tape, or sorry, painter's tape and super glue. Like there's a bunch of little things that I've found that are easier in my mind, but the rudiments of how I actually execute those things still is the same. And I'll tell everybody, if they want, like I charge a little bit more for doing dovetail bolster work because of the geometry and the setup, and it takes several hours for me to do it. And I'll tell them that. I'm like, like if I'm going to do dovetail bolsters, I'm going to do it right. But because of that, it's going to take me a little while longer, and so you're going to pay a little upcharge for it. But other than that, they're done when they're done, and they're going to be done correctly.
That's right. Well, it's a higher, it's a higher skill level. I'll just be blunt about it. You can make a cut out a knife, slap some handles on it, and grind them evenly, and then put them on the knife and polish your fronts, and in no time. But making those bolsters, whether they're soldered on or pinned on, is a skill. It's a time consuming, and it takes a lot of control and accuracy, and you know um, there's a lot of little micro steps I know that I probably didn't cover in that video. That for example, when I use a 1/8 pin to press in the material, and I use a reamer, a 1/8 reamer that's tapered. But when I ream that hole, I only let the point of that reamer touch the outside when it goes through. It doesn't peek through. That way, when I put the pin in there, the pin is like almost friction fit. And if it's loose, and you could get, that thing wobbles a little bit, and you press it on, you're done. And but there's some other things I do to prevent that as well. But I try to do that that's just little micro tips and techniques that I've just on my own learned over the years. And if those dovetails are off just a 5 thousandths, you can see them from here, 6 foot away. It doesn't take much to throw that off, and so it's really uh, it'll put the sweat on your brow when you go to press them on. You know that. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
especially if you're making a knife that has small, they're not very wide. Most of mine are 3/4 wide on say skinning knives, and if they're a half inch wide, you don't have much room to hold everything and uh, you know get your pins in without causing some kind of bulging and that sort of thing. And uh, I used to solder this stuff on you. I started out soldering. Actually, I started out brazing, and it was with brass. And I learned that from a book. And I'm not even going to tell you which book it was because it sent me down a terrible rabbit hole. And it's a very popular maker and book, and he's old now, but whatever. He makes great stuff. But it was the Captapawns that said, "Throw that crap away, man." They're Cajun friend. Throw that in the garbage and let me show you how to do that. So so that's what I did. I threw it in the garbage. Well, I still have the book, and um, I have a lot of those old books, but some of them they're eyebrow raising. But I think a lot of that was like what we were talking about a while ago, send you down a rabbit hole intentionally. But imagine brazing a guard on, or I'm talking brazing, not soldering. the temperatures you're dealing with and trying to keep from losing your temper in your knife. It's crazy stuff. But I did a few of them. I still have some of those knives. Not a one of them was ever sold, or did I try to? But um, anyway, you learn through all those life experiences and little tips and tricks and things like that. And I'm just glad that somebody like yourself picked up something from one of my videos. It means that um, it helped somebody, and it's a rewarding thing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know why I did it to myself, but I've always been drawn to smaller, what some might call daintier knives. Some people say lady knives or whatever, but you know, I spent a long time in hunting and fishing, going out and just I'll go trout fishing a lot, back up in the mountains and everything, or hills in this case. And when you take in a lot of extra gear with you, it just makes you weigh a lot. And so, you know, in that true fashion of when like ounces or pounds, I would almost never carry a whole lot of gear with me. I'd carry a fishing pole, I carry a pocket full of hooks, and I carry a pocket that had a little cup with worms in it or can, right? And when I was doing any type of cleaning or anything like that on game or fish or whatever, I didn't need a super big knife. I definitely didn't need like an 8 or 9 inch fillet knife, and you know, so small was always it made a lot of sense to me. And even still, doing like whitetail hunting and things like that, I was able to clean a lot of game with a pocket knife, and I saw some old timers use utility knives, you know, with the disposable blades and clean an entire deer. And so I knew that big knives were not necessarily necessary. But I personally liked small fixed blades and whatnot because, or pocket knives, because I could do a lot with a little bit of real estate on the blade. And getting into dovetail bolsters with, you know, you're talking about less than a half an inch on them, getting 2 pins to sit in there and getting it to not move, and you to, you know, notice all the geometrical shifts and stuff was a real pain. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got the bolster or the pins too close to where the dovetail was supposed to sit, and then it screwed up my entire placement on putting the handles on, or maybe I blew through the pinholes or whatever when I was trying to grind everything down. And those are a lot of lessons that you just have to, like, you have a very great base of information, but it's not foolproof. And you got to be able to suss that out for yourself. Like, I had to make a lot of adjustments to make sure it worked not only for my tooling and the way that I think about things, but also the canvas that I was working on, which are just smaller knives. And I can't honestly say that it got easier when I put it on bigger knives. It just changed the dynamic on how I have to do things. But that's kind of the way that information goes. Like, brazen things might have made sense to that one knife maker, or it might have been a ruse. But information, you have to take it at its value, and then you have to be able to fit it to what makes sense for you and how you can do things in your shop with the tooling and stuff you have. And it's, you know, if something requires a, you know, $5,000 piece of equipment to do that thing, then, and you just go out and buy it expecting to do it, that's not the entire circle of like what's required to apply that piece of knowledge. It takes you first.
That's right. That's what it's all about. Like I was saying earlier about the little micro things you change. There's so many micro tips and techniques that you do it. You just can't cover everything, and that's constantly evolving. You know, I see makers, old makers, making things today, doing things that they didn't do 20 years ago is totally different, and because they just evolve. And a lot of that for me is market, you know, what the people want. And a lot of, you know, the knives I make is what people want and they're what they're asking for. And what I actually use and what they want is two different things in many cases. For example, you just mentioned it, um, for years, and I make them. You've probably seen my frame locks. I make a clip point frame lock, and I have cleaned dozens of deer with a 3-inch bladed frame lock and folders just like that. To me, a 3.5 inch blade is all I need. In just any way you can skin a buffalo with it. It's You don't have to have a buoy to dress game. And now, a lot of the fish we clean here, a lot of them, bull reds and things like that. Yeah, bigger fillet knife. But I use a small knife for a lot of fish cleaning. I'm talking a 4-inch blade that is. Matter of fact, I just made some. I'm starting to move some of those, sell some of those. But personally, I've had that. You know, that's my style, my personal style. And people look at it like, what the heck is that? It looks like a very very sharp fillet knife, and but it can work as an EDC or whatever. But it's just practical for me, and you don't have to have a chopping axe or a bowie knife to skin game, and they're nice if doing camp work and uh, doing hiking and packing and things like that. If you need to trim a limb, I'm not a bushcrafter per se. I have been lost in the swamp for more than one day at a time and survived just fine without a Scandi ground knife, just using a pocket knife, but I wasn't spending time making furniture either. I was spending time surviving, actually surviving. you know I wasn't carving chairs and crap. I was skinning game. I've been lost with my brother. I've been lost by myself. We focused on food, water, and shelter. And when we were lost, and it's not a fun thing, and it's you're not in a show or a game. It is, no, nobody knows where you're at. I mean, I've been lost 15 miles in the middle of the Chafalai Swamp, and if you know how big that place is, it's several 100,000 acres big. It's probably a million acres. I don't know. It's huge. And being 15 miles from the place you put in at and lost, and then that to the point where there's search parties looking for you, and I'm focusing on the very essential things, not being necessarily comfortable, but just having something to drink and eat and stay dry, and having a clip point frame lock done just fine for all of that. Um, but I like big knives. One of my favorites is a parang and a machete, and I just made a parang a while back for my YouTube channel, and I love parang. It's a great tool in the swamp, for blazing a trail. But you could skin a squirrel with it if you had to.
Yeah, I think some people would be aghast to know that I've cleaned more game with this little S30V Kershaw liner lock that I have. I think maybe it was about eight or so years ago I bought it, and it was under $100. And the thing that I like about it is it's light, and because of the heat treat on the steel, it holds an edge real well, and that is all I need. I carry that thing around everywhere, but it has been all over. It's cleaned pronghorns and deer and hog and all sorts of stuff. I've even taken it trout fishing and everything like that too. And I think that a personal preference on a knife, like what you actually carry and what the market is looking for, are two different things, and that's something that's really difficult to distinguish when you're making a business and everything, because sometimes like what I look for in a knife is not always what I make as a maker, because my business and what sells knives is a little bit different than what I personally use. but I will always try to incorporate those things that I find the most valuable, like a really good heat treat, great grind geometry on the bevels and whatnot, the weight distribution and weight itself are a big thing, how ergonomic it feels. All of those are personal preferences that go into my knives. It doesn't matter whether it's it would be a drop point hunter or a bird and trout or something a little bit larger or smaller. It doesn't matter what the pattern itself is necessarily, but the aesthetic, those things that I look for, are really kind of like what I impart into the knife, and that's based on my experiences.
That's right, and that's what everybody should do. Hopefully, they have some experiences to do that with, because if you don't have something to fall on, how do you know what works and what don't? I mean, from just putting the knife in your hand and feeling it, and is it comfortable? I see a lot of knives that I'm like, man, that would give me a blister in 10 minutes. It's got these grooves and things all over. I can't understand that, like especially a camp knife. It needs to be comfortable and have hot spots on it. And that's my personal preference. So when I make a knife, I try to, for a customer, I'm going to give them something that it feels comfortable in my hand and uses comfortably in my hand. And I don't want to give them something unless they want to put it on the wall and they specifically say, you know, do this to it, and that's kind of rare. Yeah, I made a fantasy knife a while back. I think it's on my channel. It's part of the YouTube challenge, and it's a zombie killer or whatever you want to call it. So it's a mosaic pattern and just some screwball looking recurved knife, and something that I wouldn't get caught with, but it looks cool. And but a collector wanted that knife, and I sold it to him, and it's hanging on his wall. It's cool, definitely cool, just not something that's functional. And for 99% of the people that buy from me, they want, they're buying functional knives, and believe it or not, a lot of folks buy mosaic knives or just random Damascus pattern knives, and they hunt with them, and that's cool. You take care of them, and you can dress deer with them. I've got one that I've had, my personal Damascus knife. I've got one, and I have cleaned several deer. Last year I cleaned 3 deer with it, and it is spotless. But as soon as I get done with it, I wipe it down, put a little oil on it, and put it away. And but it performs just fine, just as good as my monosteel blades do. So they're definitely functional. That's what I want to give to the customer. Make it pretty and functional.
Yeah, and there's lots of collectors of knives, or those who will use them. They don't necessarily think about using them as survival knives. It's mostly like, this is a pretty box cut knife. I can open up all my Amazon groceries and whatever else I'm going to do. and that's not a fault or anything like that. We live in a society where there's lots of stuff that is factory to table instead of farm or out back to table. But I for a knife maker to be able to have the experience of what those core competencies in a knife are supposed to be, I think is very valuable. And because being out in the middle of nowhere, I spent some time on like the Alazam Bayou and Angelina rivers and stuff out East Texas, and forests where it's 20,000-30,000 acres and you don't know where you're going, and out in the mountains where the elements will get you and whatnot. Like, all of that gives you a really great perspective on the fact that you could be a mile away and dead somewhere because nobody can find you. And it really is as simple as if your time is out and you don't get to civilization or whatever, the elements can get you. And the difference between those who survive and those who don't sometimes is just a matter of either great preparedness and fortitude or luck. It just comes down to you don't really know. It's the same way with swimmers drown all the time. They could be a really great swimmer and they're in the water and something happens and they drown. And I would prefer, at least when I'm thinking about my knives, is what would the worst case scenario be for this thing that I'm about to send out. And if I feel confident that I would put my own life on the line with this thing in my hand, then I'd feel just as confident with somebody else using it too.
And that's exactly right. And I feel like it's you're putting your reputation on the line every time you send one out. You want to put that best quality you can. And a lot of these knives are expensive too. I mean, they can be very expensive. But I carry my own knives. I have I've got boxes of factory knives, and you mentioned one while ago that I think I have that same knife. It was given to me years ago for a birthday, a few years ago. Um, I love good factory knives, but I like to carry my own knives because I like to use them and see how they perform. One of that clip point I also have a drop point frame lock, and I still carry that knife just about everywhere I go. It's a prototype that I carry. And I have done everything you can name, as an electrician, skin and wire, you name it, stripping wire, uh, to skinning rabbits with that knife. And it's a hologram knife too. I do both flat and hollows on those blades, depends on what customers want, but um, it performed just fine. But I like to use my own knives to see how they perform because I can make changes to them, things I don't like. And that particular knife, I did make changes to it. Um, and even the clip point that I make has had several revisions to it. As a matter of fact, Steve Schwarzer has my clip point prototype. Um, we were doing some horse trading at Blade Show a couple of years ago, and he won my. That's all I had on me. I had to give it to him, but I've made several changes based on using them, and whether it's my straight knives, folders, or whatever. Um, I believe in using them and using your experiences with them. And a lot of people don't realize that makers that make knives have experience with knives, and the choices they make on their designs and that sort of thing are based on their experience. A lot of people don't realize that, and you can tell by their comments like you're just an idiot. They'll say things and like, I didn't fall off the wagon yesterday, my friend, but I've used every kind of knife you can think of in every kind of situation except well, actually, I have been in a knife fight, actual one, and I didn't come out on the good end. But you never will in any kind of situation like that. It's not Hollywood in that world. But using knives and the experience of using them teaches you a lot about how to make them and what you want. And that, whether you're a carpenter or whatever, a builder, or you name it, uh, you learn from experience and what works and what don't work. It should.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, and I think that that's something that Rambo knives. A.G. Russell, there's a video out there on YouTube that people can watch where A.G. Russell is talking about the Rambo style knives and the serrations, and he just said it's absolutely idiotic, right? Like, why would you want a saw on the back of a blade? It's almost useless. And I've had people that have asked for serrations or saw teeth on the back of their blades before, and I'll turn them down because I don't find it very practical. I mean, I used knives like that before to see how well they cut and whatnot, and there's some things that are even in the scope of normal looking knives that are still kind of fantasy, and it's the difference between big knives versus small knives, hand forged knives versus stock removal knives. It's a fighting knives versus utility knives. Like, some people get really hung up on a knife being made for a very, very specific purpose, and anything outside of that very narrow view, it means that that knife is not applicable. But if you've seen somebody skin a deer with a box cutter, you could tell the box cutter is also used for making, like, opening up boxes, or, skinning deer. Or if you got into a knife fight, I mean, terrorists have used those before. I mean, there's a lot of utility in knives that goes outside of this concept of what it was originally made for. And it really interests me, some of the psychological side of a knife, because when you kind of start getting into those groups of people who think a knife is has a certain utility within that area of use, then you start getting real campy or tribal on it. And I'm a lot more open minded than that. I can use a knife. I could use a chef knife to do a lot of stuff too that you probably cringe at sometimes. But I've used chef knives to clean game before, and open up boxes before, and all sorts of stuff. So I mean, it's just kind of like
Right.
in the eye of the beholder, right?
Well, yeah, man. You know, going back to my history of making knives and wanting to make knives and getting into knife making, and my ability or inability to stay still in life. When I was about 14 years old, I went down the martial arts trail, and but it was when I started making knives, the two wasn't together, but it was later on. I started training in Kali through Jeet Kune Do. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but that is
Mm-hmm.
the from Bruce Lee's philosophy, and I trained with some of his students. I was a apprentice under Ted Wong. It was his last private student. But I through Dan Inosanto, which was his Los Angeles protege, that he actually put in charge of his school in Los Angeles, is where I was introduced to Kali, which is a Filipino martial art. And so during that period of my martial arts training, I started delving off into the knife world, and because of the Eskrima, Kali, and Arnis arts and the stick and dagger, so I did a lot of training with stick and dagger and knife fighting, and through Pentjac Salat, and I told you my parang the parang is one of my favorite uh, tools in the field, but it was used. It was made as a tool, but it was used as a weapon a lot in that world, Indonesian world. But I found that I started wanting to make knives that were quote tactical, and but I found through the years that it didn't matter so much about the knife, that if it was sharp and pointy, it was tactical. And yeah, there's certain elements and things that you're using the knife for, say uh, a field guide, a seal, or somebody digging mines, and there's things like that. But far as self-defense, there are certain things, design elements that need to be there. But in real life situations, a pencil is a very tactical object. It's deadly, and if it's used properly. Um, but I found that my knife making started paralleling with my martial arts training, and so a lot of my older knives were influenced with the Indonesian, Asian styles and things like that. And of course, I was still making hunting and fishing knives, but I've got a variety of things like that. I never went off into the Japanese culture of knife making, like katanas and stuff like that. I made a few tantos, and matter of fact, I'm building a tanto right now for the YouTube Samurai Challenge, and it's not a traditional, but it's going to be close. It's a Gomai tanto, but it, anyway, it's crazy how all of those things influence your knife making, and that's one that certainly did. And I found that a frame lock with about a 3.5 inch blade was very practical and tactical for the years of training that I did in knife defense. And the usability and the speed and functionality of that knife was perfect for that. And even the small EDC straight blade that I'm starting to push now is another version of that with a different twist, you know. But you can also open boxes with it.
Yeah. Well, my martial arts experience started when I was young. I don't. My parents, I guess, put us. I'm one of 8 kids, so my parents tried to find some things to do with us to keep us from fighting each other. And I started in the school of Japanese. I don't know what Shito-ryu is actually considered, but it's an Okinawan style of martial arts, and
Yeah,
like. I'm trying to think here. Like Shotokan and a few others are like stem from that style
right.
of sparring and using momentum and things like that to mostly get out of a situation where you're fighting. Like the foundation of what we learned when I was doing Shitoryu was try not to get into fights in the first place, and then you won't
Exactly.
have to you won't have to worry about whether you can fight or not. But once you get down the discipline of trying not to get into fights in the first place, then it's like how do you use body motion and things if you don't have a weapon, and then it progresses into sparring, and then using weaponry. and
Exactly.
and I've always thought a lot about that. Like I prefer not getting into knife fights. I don't really like the idea of getting stabbed and poked and sliced up and whatnot. There's a lot of arteries that could end your day real quick.
Mm,
Um,
yeah,
but but the concept, yeah, is the same. Like I've always thought about that. Like if I make a knife, and it needs to be used in a survival situation, regardless of whether that's a rogue animal of some sort, whether it's a life and death type of survival situation outdoors, or whether you're getting into some type of a fight. Is it something that you can use? And I've always thought that like every single one of my knives have an EDC component to them. So whether you're opening a box or you have to get into a fight, or whether you're skin and game, those are all like components of what I think about. But then all that does come back full circle into this martial arts style that I learned, where it's like don't put yourself in a situation where you have to use something, and prepare for those circumstances if they should come around. And so that's my focus with knives. I think that's really kind of an element that I do focus on, even though it's subliminal a lot. But the at least the concept of martial arts, I think, really does help in trying to frame what is practical and what's not, what is like useful in what scenarios, and does give you the mindset of contingency, which I think is important.
that's right. Well, it's just like any, the training I did. When I started out, I actually did trained in Shotokan for a little while, very brief period. But my interest, waned off, and then I, got interested into the Jeet Kune Do world, and mainly because of the 5 ranges of combat, and one of them being grappling, and which was kind of unheard of in those days. Which I've been in many scuffles, and they always end up on the ground, pretty much 98% of them, and that's what attracted me. But then there's also the element of weapons, and especially today, everybody carries weapons, and but I always looked at even the training, and even the arts, the Kali and the Penjak Salat, and they're all they're more defensive until you have to go into offense. But you're living in a defensive world, so one of the things you would do, say in Kali, is you would defang the snake, and those are the extremities, the hands, the fingers, um, and so you're defending, not being the aggressor, but defending. And you're not, you walk out the door every day. You're not planning on having this confrontation in life, and I've been there, and it wasn't it wasn't my fault. It wasn't looked for. It wasn't planned. Fortunately, I came out of it okay, and in both situations. But one situation, and this was from my training, was having a gun put in my face, and through my training, I know this what it was. It was being able to talk the perpetrator out of shooting me between the eyes, and talked him down, and just using psychology, which is one of the principles of Jeet Kune Do. And it's the art of fighting without fighting. And using psychology as a weapon to defend yourself. And weapons itself are secondary. You got to use your mind to stay out of trouble, for one. And then, but if it jumps on you, you gotta do what you can to survive. And having a practical tool that'll help, whether it be a knife or a gun or whatever, is a plus in my book. So if it's an ink pen or a pencil, you name it.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite movies is Gross Point Blank with Cusack, and he uses a fountain pen.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a good
Well,
movie.
I can tell you, you go to any prison and there's nothing but round, sharp, pointy objects when it comes to shanks. They're whether it's an ink pen, you can't, you know, having something that pierces the body, to reach a vital area or even just cause trauma is all that's needed, whether it's an ink pen or a machete. I mean, it's you get poked pretty good, pretty deep with something like that, and it's psychological as well, and it's part of the trauma. It's I've been stabbed, and you may not know it at the moment, but you will a few minutes later. Um, it's like a person that's being shot with a 22. They may not feel it or know it at the moment, but it's not gonna take long. It's very damaging.
Yeah.
To think.
Even the, even the porcupine with its needly quills could thwart a lion. So
Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, it doesn't take much to distract you, um, especially when the appearance of blood uh, comes into play. It's very psychological.
yeah. Well, kind of on that note, there's a lot of things I think about knives that are very philosophical, and there's so many things about like the mechanisms of knives. Like, is this thing does it look the best that I think it can? Am I selling knives? Do people like me? That also distract you from being able to just stay the course and perfect yourself, right? And then this kind of like balance of talking about survival and defensiveness and offensiveness and knives. I think that we get really hung up sometimes on the approval rating of other people, and I hope that in some ways when people think about like conversations like this, it spurs them on to maybe think a little bit less about having fans in some ways, or having groupies, and instead just like keeping your head down and working on your craft. Because like at the end of the day, like all these things come out, like your value systems, your experiences and things like that formulate what it is that you think about in knives when you're making them. It all comes out kind of in the wash. And if you focus on that versus trying to focus on the pomp and circumstance of knives, I think that that's a better route to go down, because what you're producing, is a direct reflection of you and your experiences.
So much, man. It's the truth, and I see for years I didn't. Um, Going back to the disputes I was talking about between the two organizations, and not seeing any of that today. What's disheartening is when you see individuals in social media doing that. It's like something new to them. It's like, man, this is old arguments. Why are you bringing this back up again? There's a um, you'll see folks online. I'm not a traditional knife maker in the sense, or bladesmith. Like I said, I do stock removal only and forge knives, but there's stock removal in every bit of it. Unless you sharpen it on a rock after you get through forging it out, it's stock removal, and then it's still stock removal. But I see there's a lot of young makers that are. It's not a lot. It's a few that I see that's developing this snobbery, and man, I just hope that can be discouraged because it's not healthy, for the community. Um, help each other. A knife is a knife, and like I tell people, when you buy a bar of steel to make your knife from, whether you forge it or cut it out, it's already forged from the factory. It's either cold forged or hot rolled, cold rolled or hot rolled. That's forged. It comes annealed, ready to go. Now, when you forge it, then you need to do some thermal cycling and fix all that crap that you disoriented in that steel, and do your quench and tempering. But uh, there's nothing wrong with the either or, and I just don't understand why you got some of that happening in the community. And I just hope it doesn't roll over and like it did back in the past. I don't see that, and I'm glad to see that because you got some great makers in both styles.
Yeah. Well, I I, I think that there's a lot more knowledge transfer that goes on amongst makers now, where the difference. If we're talking about blade steels, the difference between S30V and uh, I don't know, some like CPM 154, there are some differences,
Yeah.
but the felt difference to the end user is really kind of marginal. And some people might like hear that and gasp, but really it kind of comes down to 440C. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, there are things that it might not be the best for, but it largely doesn't matter. I mean, I've seen some really, really cheap knives that don't hold an edge really well, but they still stab the same way. They'll cut, they just won't cut as long. And there's all this like art, like in knife collecting and knife use. In some ways, there's a lot of artificial mechanisms for, I guess, gauging quality, like how many times you can cut a rope with something, or does it pass a paper test or whatever. There's plenty of grinds that I've seen from a lot of different makers that if you held it up to a piece of paper to cut it, it wouldn't. But I can guarantee you it'll break down one or two elk without needing to be stropped. And it all comes down to the geometry for the purpose, and so on. So I guess in some ways, if the argument comes from the end user, it's kind of like opinion is like a butthole. Everyone has one, and they stink, right? But if it's coming from the makers, I think that's an education thing, because a maker that perpetuates a myth is either doing it because they're trying to differentiate themselves, or they're not embracing like what we know collectively to be true, or something like that. And those are ones that just need to mature. But for everyone else, like if a customer wants S30V and they're willing to pay for the knife, and they're like, okay, you use S30V, I'll buy a knife from you, then okay, I'll sell it to you. If they want some like special magic steel that I don't care for too much, then I might not work with it. I mean, if something takes too long to do a hand finish on, or if they're looking for something super expensive that they don't want to pay for, things like that. I mean, I'll let my, kind of where I'm at and what I want to do dictate whether I'll work with it or not. But Another maker can't really necessarily convince me that one thing is better than the other, because we do luckily have collective knowledge that we can fall back on, and kind of acts as the ballast for us in being cordial, and a community of makers at least that aren't trying to fight over stupid stuff.
Right. You're hitting the nail on the head. It's about education and maturity. It's experience. And I like you say, I know better. You can't convince me because I just know better. The experience has told me, shown me. And I'll tell you that Laren Thomas is my hero because he has put the stuff out there and has proven through science, what a lot of us have been saying for many years, dispelling these crazy myths, even things he don't cover, like quenching magnetic north and edge packing. And I'm talking about edge packing on high carbon steel, not brass and bronze. And just, when you, what all happens when you heat treat a knife, and what happens to those carbides and how they're reset, and all of that packing you did is going to go away as soon as you thermal cycle it and quench it and temper it. I mean, it's really common sense, but I'm just glad that you got somebody out there like that who is the son of a legend who became a metallurgist and is putting it out there and giving it to the community. I love it. And you would think that people would, educate themselves and learn some of that. But I I really like to use a variety of steels, but I do stick to three or four different ones primarily. And it like you said, most end users don't really see the difference in particular steels in day to day. When I did my performance test, and you know how that test is done for the ABS journeyman and mastersmith test as far as the performance portion. And you got to cut a free hanging 1 inch rope and then chop a 2x4 in half twice, and then it has to shave, and then it has to take a 90-degree bend, which is really a heat treating technique. But the the point is, if that if I can take a piece of 1084, which is what I use, which is the basic kind of a very forgiving steel, and do all of that with it, and it still performs after all of that abuse. I mean, you're really not going to see much difference unless that knife's made. That performance knife is made to do that. It's made to chop and so forth. But I can make knives all day long with 1084, and they perform just fine. They'll hold edge and do their job. And it comes down to your big majority of it is edge geometry. I take my edges down. Most all of them are 20 or less, 20 thousandths or less on the edge. And if you do that, and then put your secondary based on what it's going to be used for, and for that particular knife, it was a convex right on the secondary, and you can't beat it. It performs just fine. Just your basic cheap steel, high carbon steel.
Yeah, no, I had Laren on quite a few episodes ago because I wanted to talk to him about his new book about knife steel and history. I thought that was
Yeah.
really it was good because Laren largely self researched all of it, and I know that there are some inconsistencies on timelines or things, but he's building all of that up off of a lot of anecdotal information, because there wasn't either people were doing stuff at the same time, or it wasn't really well documented, and some people are still not alive, and other people are like, well, they were the first to invent it, and that might not necessarily be the case. But his mind for being able to stitch together the where we came from in early civilization up to now, where we have just incredible knowledge sets around different steels and everything, to me is indispensable. And I mean, he's told me more times than I can count that that's perpetuating a myth. Like if I say something and he catches it, he'll be like, that's perpetuating a myth. And I appreciate it because he's very willing to at least differentiate what he knows to be true versus conjecture. But I fully agree. A well heat treated, high quality knife, is just that, and that's I think what everybody should be looking for first. Not some wizardry, that's a difference between forging or stock removal or whatever, but looking at the intrinsic quality of was it heat treated well. I almost never get questions from people who are using my knives about heat treat. It's rare even that they'll ask about what the Rockwell hardness is or how it's being ground or anything. Those are things that I feel compelled to talk about, but an end user almost never asks those questions.
Well, no, I hardly get those anymore. I used to, but it's most of the, I have a lot of repeat clients and a lot of collectors, but there it is. You eventually people will know your work. They know your knives, and it's kind of mute. But I enjoy that too. That's why I shoot a lot of videos showing the process and explaining what I'm doing, and at least what I can with a limited amount of time to in a video. Um, and it's just I'm not a pro at anything, but I try to follow procedures and practices that are well established. There's a lot of things that we're doing today that are different, and especially quench mediums. And that's one of the things that we were talking about. Dr. Laren, he, he's he's got it out there, and when it comes to your certain engineered quenching oils. A lot of people using stuff that's you're not getting the best performance out of your heat treat by using a mediocre quench medium. Yes, so there's a lot of. I've got a book. I'm sitting here looking at it on my shelf over there from the '80s. Of this concoction to quench your knife in. Yeah, it gets it hard, but now you can. There's engineered oils for the specific series of steels, and that's what I would prefer to use. Why not? Because you can get you can maximize the performance, and your customer will appreciate that. It'll go a long way.
Yeah, that's something. When I was talking with Steve Schwarzer about like cross disciplinary knowledge, right? Like taking one area of expertise and using it in another. Like you're a good example of that because you have this passion for videography and setting a visual narrative and things like that, and you incorporate that into your videos, right? And heat treating mediums has been around for a long time because industrially, if anything was heat treated, they had to find the best way to quench it. And like my Rockwell hardness tester is probably from the 50s, and I'm sure that it tested a lot of different steels in a manufacturing setting because those were the specifications that they had to follow. But I know lots of people who have not really cared so much about heat treating. Like they'll say, well, if it skates a file, it's fine. And that doesn't really work for me. I like to be able to test it and understand what its Rockwell is. I like to be able to understand the metallurgy of it and what grain structure looks like, because, the only way to find out whether you did something right is to destroy it, basically, and check those things out. And eventually you get good at following the recipes enough to get to a place where you know that what's happening inside of that steel is not catastrophic to its use. But there's so many areas where if you have the knowledge in one specific type of discipline, it transfers very well over into the arts and knife making and other things like that. And so I like to encourage people not to get so stuck up on just doing knives. That understanding the world around you is a very important thing too. Like, I mean, for instance, like when I'm looking at some of your frame locks and whatnot, anodizing titanium and whatnot is another complete avenue of chemical and electric modification of oxides on a surface that you need to be aware of if you want to be able to perform those certain types of things, like whether you're using heat anodization or electrical or whatever. There's an entire like subgenre of embellishments and things that you can do to your blades if you understand some about electricity, some about heat, some about the metal that you're using, and can tie all those things in together.
Yep, that's exactly right. But like you said, it's a continual learning process. I mean, I have never engraved anything. I've done some wire inlay, and now I'm trying to get off into the engraving world because I'd really like to learn it. But it is to be good at it. It takes years of practice and skill development. And while I want to do it, I'm just going to, I'll be tinkering around with it. But I've got a lot of people, or a few people, that have really impressed me and inspired me. You take Jerry Fisk, Master Smith Jerry Fisk, and he does his own engraving now. He's not been engraving that long, and his stuff looks beautiful. And that's really inspiring and impressive. When you see somebody that can pick it up and go with it, it's just all about putting your mind to it. But it is for me, it's always trying to learn something new and stay relevant and stay fresh. Don't get stagnant because you'll find, at least I do, that you make a lot of the same things over and over and over, and you're missing out on things, on growing, and that's a lot of the problems with doing customs.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that that's a great point. Is just not allowing yourself to stagnate and to go far, like long enough of doing the same thing where you start building this confirmation bias. Like this is the way that I've always done it, and it's the only way to do it. That there's the more I learn, the more I realize I know nothing, and the more I learn, though, the more deeply entrenched in this world of knives I become. I mean, the podcast was like me wanting to be able to talk to people like you and to have conversations like this about just, all of the different components, like what makes up knives. It's not, yeah, sure, it's the knife that makes up the knife world, but it's really more than that. It's getting lost in the swamp for a few days. It's working in manufacturing or something like that, and seeing other people make knives. It's being in World War II and seeing all the theater knives and everything like that are around. It's it's the exposure through magazines and everything. Like those stories are like the driving forces for so many lives in knives, and that to me is super interesting. And who would have thought, in me just kind of like trying to scratch the surface on what really kind of makes this knife thing what it is, have I really realized that I don't know that I'll ever know. But it's great to have conversations like this and talk about things because, like, even in the scope of what we've talked about, I've taken a lot of inspiration and a lot of things that, I'm going to have to chew on for a while and see, like, how can I incorporate that mentality into what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, sir. I agree with you. It's a thing that I wake up with every day is, what am I going to do that's going to make it easier, better, and you know, it's things you have to weigh out in life with anything you do, and knife making is just one of them.
I totally agree. Well, I know that you got lots of shop stuff to do, and I really appreciate the time that you spent sitting with me and talking about everything that we have. I hope that the listeners obviously get something out of that, and I'll make sure to post up all your social media and website contacts and things like that. But if there's ever a situation where you need anything from me, I'm not that far away, and again, it's been a humongous honor to talk to you after all this time of using your materials online to educate myself on knives.
Wow, man, I appreciate that. You don't know what that means, and I appreciate you allowing me to come on. I really enjoy it, man.
Yes, sir. It's absolutely my pleasure.
Yes, sir. Well, I hope you get feeling better. I know you was under the weather, and we'll be talking later, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.